This is the Bailed Out Podcast,
You have rights.
Nobody knows how to deal with the bureaucracy.
where we talk bail to keep you out of jail.
The only thing that saved me each time is I wasn't drunk.
Does that mean you're a really bad driver then?
Hosted by Sean Plotkin, a multi-generational bail agent and 5-star author. And John Rorobar, a non-profit founder and attorney who has helped over 20,000 families.
We're not far right, we're not far left, we're very neutral, I hope.
Bail is the balance.
John, what is justice?
That is what the court system is there to establish.
Bailed Out is brought to you in part by searchandmate.com, Turning Leaf, and Angels Bail Bonds. Now, please welcome your hosts, Sean and John.
Hi there, welcome to the Bailed Out Podcast. This is Sean and John.
Greetings.
We were thinking, well, you guys don't know who we are or what we're about or what searchandmate.com is or Angels Bail Bonds or the Bail Book or Turning Leaf. So today we're going to talk about John's world, and his special heart place of Turning Leaf. John?
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Greetings. So, you know, as I like to tell people, I had 5 kids by the time I was 25, and then I went to law school. And I was fortunate enough to go with
How did you end up, like, when was your first child?
Yeah, I was 16. Just
16.
10 days from being 16, yes.
So wait, your first child was born before you were 16?
I
10
was
days
still
before?
16. No, I was just almost 17.
Okay.
Yeah, he was born February 15th. I'm the 25th. So, but yeah, and I had just moved from had a fire that burned down a house in Oakdale near where I was born, near Modesto, and moved to Clovis. Went to Clovis West, the big, the big school at the time had a $7 million swim complex, and learned about AP classes. This was back in the 80s. And
Did
so
you
that
end up
stuff
taking
was
any
new.
AP tests?
I did, and actually that's the reason I was able to become a lawyer without having to take the baby bar is because I had enough AP classes with my 1 year of college that I had 60 units, and so I could. So I don't have a college degree. I was selling copiers. I had sold computers. I had a lot of other jobs. Sold jewelry. I had traveled. We traveled to Montana, and New Mexico, and California, and we had done a lot by the time I decided that I had just failed and I had to try something else. My 5th child had just been born. We had 9 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. I don't know, he's 30 years old now, but his first bedroom was actually the towel cupboard. We had to put him in the towel cupboard.
And this is Jared, or
this is Jared? Yeah, this is Jared.
So who helped raise Jared while you were going and getting your AP classes and Mama Bear?
So we homeschooled. We, their mother, I met their mother in high school, and I, just after the fire, and we were married for many years, and she left when I was in my early 30s and found a guy in Florida on the internet and left me with the 5 kids. And I had been so fortunate that I found this practice that I do, that I've done for nearly 30 years, because, think of all the things that we did 30 years ago that we're not doing now.
Yeah, I'd probably be about 15 and looking after ladies and just thinking of sports.
Well, that's true too. But I, just as the legal system and all of our systems have changed a lot since the early 90s when I started, working.
Well, how old were you when you began in law?
So I became an attorney. I was sworn in just before I turned 30. So I started law school at, I think, 26. And it's 3 years, to finish. Got sworn in the office of Albert Ramirez Sr., just so I could do a bail motion. I could appear in court and be an attorney a few days earlier. I was very ambitious at the time. I started with Mark Bernstein. Mark Bernstein is an attorney who is my mentor, really the most important non-family member. He's retired in Costa Rica now, but he had his office going, and Albert Ramirez was in law school, so he just asked Albert if he knew any interns, anybody who'd come in and work at his office, right? And my unemployment had just run out because I wasn't able to sell copiers and go to law school successfully after selling copiers to the law school. That's how I funded my first semester. But Albert, we had just met in classes and we liked each other, and he recommended me, and I went in and interviewed with Mark Bernstein, and that's really the only job I've had. I was still in my second year of law school at the time. It was like 93.
Wow. And so what did Mark Bernstein specialize in that he had you working on?
Yeah, the same things we're doing now, which is to, when the bail agents have a forfeiture, we try and find ways to resolve that forfeiture without it being paid. And mostly that involves either catching the defendant or finding a mistake that the court made so that the bond doesn't have to be paid. But a lot of it also from that time to now was in the legislature. We, through the mid 90s, we and Topo Padilla and Terry Fowler, Mark Bernstein, Leonard Padilla, we proposed and had passed a lot of laws in the mid 90s that changed the way bail was done. And it emphasized more of being able to catch defendants and bring them back, and less about having collateral and money that you have ahead of time to be able to get out. And I think the use of those tools, most of which we got implemented through the 90s, has really done a lot to help the system. And the erosion of those rules by the imposition of government pretrial has turned the clock back on a lot of that progress.
So some of what you say that you've done and some of your co-attorneys had done is help to make bail easier for the general public, where they don't need to have large amounts of money to put up for collateral. And you had put the impetus back onto the surety companies and the bail agents to say, hey, we're going to do our job to work with the families to help bring the defendants back to court so that they can go to trial or be found guilty or not guilty, and make it an easier process rather than leaving people in jail and then sitting in jail throughout the whole court process.
Absolutely. The goal of bail is always to get people out of jail. The question is what security is necessary to do that. And some of the specific things that we did in the early 90s, for instance, is when I had started, the bail agent had 90 days to bring a defendant back, or they had to pay the forfeiture. Just before I had started, as I was starting, they extended that to 180 days. And then 5 years later, they allowed in the mid 90s, the bail agent, if they were doing the work of trying to catch the defendant, could get another 180 days, so that there's up to a year period to cure. Whenever you're making the decision of whether to bail someone out, let me ask you, what is the most important things that you are evaluating on the risk? It's the likelihood of your having to pay. I kind of gave you the answer because I wanted to.
I'm trying to process it. It's taken me a while. I do like to reduce the risk, but I'm a little bit more risk prone, where I like to take chances. So even if I have to pay, I like to roll the dice and see, hey, is this person going to work out? If not, let's keep a closer eye on him. But I think that goes back to what turning leaf.
But the number of faces on the dice make a difference.
That's true. Those 20-sided dice help.
Exactly. So by actually making it, giving bail agents more tools to cure, it has made it more likely that people can get released on bail. It actually reduced the if you watch Jackie Brown, there's this great negotiation between Samuel Jackson and Robert Forrester, where Samuel Jackson's negotiating a bond. And it's a $10,000 bond, and Forrester not only gets the $1,000, but he gets $10,000 to put in bank as collateral. When I came into the world, into the world of bail, that's what it was like. It was still very much like that, and that ability to instead focus on the social connections came out of a lot of the lobbying work we did in the 90s.
Great. So a lot of what you and your co-attorneys have done is to help get them out. So let's talk about what you're thinking about to keep them out.
Yeah. So, Being an attorney is very interesting in your perspective because you're involved in a lot of fights, but none of them are your own fight. If that makes sense. I mean, that whole being a representative for for someone. So the now I think I lost where I was going.
Well, we're talking about once somebody's out of jail, and you had talked about how you had made it for, forfeitures to be able to make being able to bail people out easier.
Yes.
I think one of the impetuses for you spending so many years seeing so many cases, thinking,
Yeah.
how can we prevent people from having to even have forfeitures or we've talked about what a forfeiture
Right.
is, but that's where
Right.
the defendant doesn't appear in court. The court gives a notice saying, hey, you got to come back to court or you can be considered a fugitive, and then it can mount from there. John started a nonprofit called Turning Leaf, and he saw some perceived problems in the bail system that can help to alleviate solving a defendant's problems after the fact and trying to be more proactive.
Absolutely. So that's one of the things you'll see when you go through the criminal justice system is it's just very complicated. There's a very complicated process, and so much of our criminal justice system just avoids that process by plea bargaining. They bargain away all of the complexity, and that in some ways has been very good because California has implemented a lot of help for people who have drug problems or other developmental problems or mental health problems. They've develop the programs, but they have a problem. They still can't get people into the programs.
Do you mind first? So a plea bargain is when there is a charge and they negotiate for the porridge isn't too hot or too cold, but just right. But sometimes that doesn't work to the defendant's best case scenario. And so, John, can you explain why a plea bargain may be good or may not be good as one of the perceived problems in the court and bail system?
Well, I do, but I want to, I want to take it a little bit of a different angle on the plea bargain because,
Answer how you will.
right, because plea bargains for a defendant are really hard to evaluate, right? Because you could be in jail, right? So whether that's good or bad is hard to know. But when you look at the effect of a plea bargain on the rest of the system, you can see that one of the big problems is you never really find out what happened. There's a lot of secrecy that ends up being involved with a plea bargain because everybody keeps quiet or mostly, before the trial, and it avoids the trial. It avoids the public nature of it. The victims don't really understand what happened often. They don't. So part of justice is the process of justice and knowing what happened and the effects that it has around not just the defendant and the victim, but all of the social circumstances that are around that. So one of the difficulties in having a system that has a very small percentage of the cases being actually tried is that the public doesn't really know what's going on. It reduces the legitimacy of the system. A real crisis that I think we're having right now overall politically is a crisis of legitimacy. And part of that legitimacy is people understanding that when the court is going to have a justice system, when you're going to set up a justice system run by a court, when you know what's going on in that court, that public access, it's one of those fundamental areas. And plea bargains interfere with that in a way that I don't think a lot of people realize. Just because our system is either a very complicated trial or a plea.
Could that, and is that intended to be one element of Turning Leaf to help educate the families and further on how to handle or navigate?
Absolutely. So turning leave is really a very simple idea, which is that when one of your family members is arrested, that family needs support as well as the victim's family. But when you are the indemnitor, the one who has stood up for the defendant to make sure that he goes to court, that part of your interests is to make sure the defendant's life is improved in the best way you can. Now, what does that mean? I don't know what that means for that defendant, right? You don't know what that means because people are hard, right? But the most likely person to know is the indemnitor because that's somebody who is both someone that the defendant asked for help from, and someone that a bail agent has qualified to be able to help. And so if you take and you look at just the roles that are played in the criminal justice system, that role of the indemnitor they've got the information, they've got the leverage. If you can support them, then we can have the best chance of keeping the defendant from ever having to go through the system, to ever have the stigma.
So an indemnitor is somebody that could be a family member or a close friend or a landlord or a reverend or someone that's willing to vouch and guarantee the defendant's appearance in court. And if they don't appear in court, to help cooperate to bring the defendant back to court, or potentially be financially liable to reimburse any of the costs that could occur from the forfeiture.
Exactly. So just to give you an example of where that plays through specifically, LA has tried for a long time to be able to get people into mental health rather than into jail. And they call it their care before jail process. Unfortunately, they've had a really hard time getting people into the system because it occurs later in the criminal process. It occurs later in the criminal process, and there's a difficulty in the bureaucracy in distinguishing between mental health issues and substance abuse issues. And so between the two, they often get bounced out, and the
What's bounced out? That means no longer a part of that program?
so apologize. They don't qualify for the program, or they don't show up in court. Even the courts that are trying to help the defendants, it's hard to have them get the help.
So it comes down to somebody that's making an analysis of whether one person would fill out this form this way or that way. And so it could be a very
Often.
subjective. Okay.
Yeah, often, it could, because there's one set of treatment options for substance abuse and a separate set for mental health. And what you find is they just get bounced back between the two. You've got somebody with a mental health issue that also has a fentanyl issue. The mental health people just refer them back and forth, and because you don't have that coordinating person that understands the defendant. That's what's missing. That's what's missing in the efforts to help the defendants, is having the person on their side.
And to hop in as a bail agent, one of the
Yeah.
things that I take into consideration is a previous drug history, or if a defendant had been 5150, or as they would say, somebody that's mentally unfit. And that is a determination to determine if that person's going to go to court or not. And one
Right.
of the factors that I'm like, okay, will this person be lucid, sound mind, know what they're doing, know why they're doing it? So turning leaf as a bail agent, I think, would be a very helpful thing, going, all right, is the family willing to have the defendant with turning leaf, which will be an additional social fabric, an additional support network to
Right.
help educate, inform, and to guide, a gentle hand guiding the defendant and their families that often don't have the time or energy to go do the research and aren't experts in the field, to have that extra person on their side to help make sure that they make their court appearances or make the right decisions, or don't take a plea bargain if it's not in their best interest.
Or quite frankly, to fight with the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you just need a champion because the programs are available, but getting to them, even very small bureaucratic, issues can cause you to not qualify. If you don't have an ID, it's just calling the right person, just being up. I see that constantly in the criminal justice system, is that defendants are not giving the support to even show up. So for instance, with the government pretrial report that they came out of in LA, they're having, out of citations, almost half of the people, sometimes more than half of the people, never show up in court, because just getting them to court, getting them through the process, getting them through those bureaucratic steps that they need to get access to the money is beyond somebody in crisis's capability.
Can you expound, or if you'd like me to, and
Of course.
I'll help to elucidate an example that would be more concrete, is that I have some people that are, let's say, one socioeconomic status, that are perhaps not here legally, that drive. And they often, let's say they get a ticket and they have to appear in court, and they don't want to because they're afraid of what
Right.
could happen from the repercussion of the court system. So this person could end up having a warrant on their record for 15, 20 years. I'm like, you have a warrant from the 90s? What's going on here?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if somebody ended up getting a ticket, then they could But how would they go to turning leaf if they got a citation? Let's say even a
Yeah.
moving citation.
Right. Yeah. So right now, Turning Leaf is set up to work with bail agents, and so it
Right.
comes from those who are generally the more difficult cases. But you're right; those driving cases with immigrants cause all sorts of problems, and they come through. A part of that is if you can get support with somebody who is you think about the things that you just said, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to go to court because they're afraid of being deported,
Right.
right? Well, California is actually very careful about not asking about that and not using that. It's a sanctuary state. That's a problem that's been solved. They don't know that because they're not able to properly interface with the bureaucracy to
Yeah.
have someone they trust tell them that.
Though
That's a good example.
that could be a very good example because these clients end up with $30,000 bonds, and then they don't have the 3,000, so they stay in custody.
Yep.
But I have bailed out people that once they are released from custody, are put in. They're not technically released as part of something. Some of my clients are released from care and given to ICE. So
Right.
that
Not
even
any-
though we are
I
a
don't think
sanctuary
anymore.
state.
I don't think unless they have a serious or violent criminal conviction, then I think they're still turning them over.
But how would that fall under domestic violence, which is considered a serious or violent
It could be.
crime?
Yeah.
So then I guess that could be a subjective interpretation from the person that's.
So it's, I could be wrong on this.
Yeah.
I've not the last time I
Right.
checked, the way that system was working is if the defendant had a conviction that qualified to be excludable, that California was still sitting them over. But for investigation and for new crimes or for being here illegally, they wouldn't turn you over. So you're right. There's always, when you're dealing with state entities, that's always a difficult thing to do. But having the you need a friend on the inside, right? And the
Absolutely.
first thing you need is a friend, right? So you've got to build a structure of relationships, through to the defendants to communicate with them, because so little of what's actually happening in the California criminal system is known to somebody that comes from another country. Right. There's some very different places that people come from, right? And very ordinary things that they're doing, like driving and having a license. That is weird in some ways.
Yeah.
You
Well, I
know?
mean, I'd argue that you and I are pretty much subject matter experts in this field, and we're even debating on so
Yeah.
how do we expect somebody that comes from another culture that
Right.
may or may not be able to speak the language to be, and their own culture has them have an innate training. There's something called the power distance index, Hofstede's power distance index, where certain cultures give much more respect to, let's say, a court
Yes.
than other cultures. So
Yes.
if many of our clients are from cultures that are much more respectful to stratification, then they may just not want to go to court, or they may be afraid of the repercussions, or they don't even know how to navigate it, so they'd be more likely to take a plea or take something that would not be in their best benefit. So I could see a
Yeah.
huge benefit to Turning Leaf helping out a large part of the population.
Yeah, I mean, I have a family from El Salvador, and they're generally speaking, much higher class than I am. They're doctors and very professionals in my wife's family, but there have been those who have had the criminal, and it's that driving that has been the driving without a license, or the DUIs, those, and when they don't want to respect the system because they don't understand it, then it gets 3, 4, 5, 6 arrests sometimes, and you can be deported sometimes, just from that. And it really is just a matter of ignorance. It really is just not having that cultural awareness of the way that the California systems run, because California runs in many ways a very consistent system. When you're in court every day, it's one of the experiences that I have that very few people have, is just sitting in court every day. I know your grandfather was a judge, but that's just one courtroom. And you go to lots of different courtrooms, and you see them, and the judges are really on your side in most cases. The judges really want to help, but people don't know how to get access to that, and they take opportunities that the judges give them, and they throw them away.
Yeah, so a lot of what you're talking about is respect and being able to adhere to the system. But if you don't know the system,
Right.
then you got to find somebody that's going to hold your hand and help nurture the family,
Exactly.
be more of that social fabric to be able to get you to where you're going. It's insane to think about. I used to make a lot of mistakes. I've done a lot of bad things,
Yeah.
and my dad would grind me all the time. He'd say, "Sean, You need to exercise better judgment. What you're falling into is the poor judgment chain. I'm like, Dad, what's that? And he's like, well, pilots, if they make one bad mistake and they don't do a pre-flight check, then there could be frost on the wing, and that can cause you
Right.
to. So one small step needs to another step and another step. So in essence, turning leaf is baby steps to help make the best decisions to get
Right.
the best outcome for the defendant.
Right, exactly. And using that greater cultural awareness that bail agents already have, and that and they've already selected the person. You know, the indemnitor is there. They're part of the system,
Yeah.
right? They're just not being supported. It's not being developed in the way that's optimal. And because of that, the courts are struggling with things that they're trying to fix. You know,
So,
they
so let
really
me
are struggling with. California courts don't want to punish you for substance abuse or mental illness. They really don't.
All right, so let's say I get arrested. At what point of the process? So I get a bail bond, or I get out, and typically this is only for people with bail bonds. You're thinking that you may do it for people that get cited out, maybe at some future point.
You know, listen, there's a lot of programs that already exist,
Right.
right? And that might be integrated as well. My insight is that
Yeah.
the people that I've been representing effectively in the bail forfeitures for 30 years are the people whose input we need to make the system work.
Great. So people that may at that point where aren't able to qualify for bail because I would deem or other bail agencies would deem that this is too much of a risk, it may make sense to work with turning leaf, whereas a criteria for us to release the defendant or post bail is to work with you. So let's say I'm in jail
Right.
and I can't get bailed out on my own because I don't have enough money or collateral, but I do have loved ones that will vouch for me.
Right.
What would be my next step with turning leaf?
So there's two things about money with bail that is important. One is the security you post with the court, and that's going to be there, and that's necessary, and the system needs that. The other is the amount you pay a bail agent to post that money with the court,
Mhm.
and that the source of money for that has been solely the family. It's been solely the essentially the indemnitor most of the time. The one who has pledged to take the punishment is also the one who's paying to post the security. And that's a necessity that's not necessary. There are other ways to get premium to pay you if you're willing to take the risk, right? So a part of that risk evaluation for you for bail agents has to be, I'm going to be wrong some of the time. I've got to take some of this money and pay the forfeitures, right? So you've got to you've got to make an economically viable decision on how much money you need to post that security to have that liability, right? But I'd like to do fundraising for that. I'd like to be able to subsidize the premium for those who qualify for the public defender, for instance, because it doesn't make sense for the state to spend hundreds of dollars a day to hold somebody in custody and completely deprive them of their liberty when it's only a few days worth of money that you get them out for the entire case. And the flows of the case are very different when a defendant is with their loved ones or when the defendant is incarcerated and can be leveraged to make a bad deal for himself.
Well, it's also not just the cost to be keeping an inmate incarcerated. It's also the cost for the health care to be paying for the
Right,
jailers and for the people that are
right,
there, and the
right.
food, and then
Yeah.
the medical if anybody gets hurt, and then the liability if anybody does
And does
get
he
hurt,
lose
and the
his job?
repercussions,
And
the opportunity costs, like you're
right,
talking about, not being able to take little Timmy to baseball practice,
right.
or be able to help Abuelita to be able to get her to where she needs to go.
Right. Pretrial incarceration can cause what the California Supreme Court. I think that it's fun. I mean, it's. Oh no, I'm losing the phrase that they used. But it is a very difficult time to be incarcerated by the state before the state has proved their case, and that causes a lot of consequences that need to be minimized. The state has its interests. They need to make sure you're there, and that's why I like posting security, because if people's interests are aligned in appearing in court, then we can have a system. Now, I also, want to have a good system. I don't want to be a part of a system that is abusive to people, right? And so while I like California's a lot of the changes they've made on their intents, they still need some more. I think bail can give it some tweaks, and if bail unites around supporting their own client base, which is the indemnitors, that all of a sudden gives us the ability to heal a lot of these wounds that have been, that we've had with at least since the 90s, since my law career.
So one of the proponents for against bail are that it isn't fair to those that don't have the money to get out. But I can see how your turning leaf would help those that are potentially in the greatest need, who are going to be stuck in jail
Right.
and not being able to go have that job where they need to be paying for their family's needs
Right.
and as such. So as a bail agent, I would definitely think that if turning leaf were there, and it's that 30 to 40% of client calls that we get where we try and figure out creative solutions, but they don't work out. And I often ask the customer, oh, it seems like you've been calling around. What's the best deal you've gotten? Why haven't they taken it? And it's like, oh, well, I've got $100 or $1,000, and let's say it's a $10 or $100,000 bond, and they need 10,000. It's like, well, that's a little bit hard, but what do you do? And if people don't
Right.
qualify for it, but I can see that it's a loved one that is willing to be in it, even though there are sentimental tokens that we'll take for collateral, having turning leaf, I think, would help that 1/3 of those incarcerated to be able to get out. Now, you're saying,
Well, I
yeah,
would hope so. Now, you actually bring up an interesting angle that's a little different than I had thought about, right? I'd kind of been thinking about turning leaf once the indemnitor is established, right? Because the bail agents go through that. But you're right. If that indemnitor can get support, then you're more likely to bail them out and minimize that, them staying in custody.
yes,
Because everybody has agreed on that.
yes.
Everybody has agreed we
It's
need
the
to minimize
2/3
that.
that get out. You're helping the 1/3 that is the bail proponents versus the bail reform proponents. Yeah, it could be.
I don't agree with that.
Okay. Well,
I
you
don't agree with
disagree.
that because the 2/3 that get out also need support.
If there are
Often the
sufficient
1/3
collateral, yes.
if we're talking about that group, the 2/3
Yeah.
that get out and the 1/3 that stay, why do the 1/3 stay? Couple of reasons. One is they've got prior criminal records that make their bails really high under the bail schedules. If you look at the jail population at a particular time, the average bail of the ones in jail, you'll find it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Because the small ones get out fast, and the ones that are left behind are the ones that are big. Those are hard because you have to have somebody willing to take the risk for someone who has a proven criminal record.
Mhm.
And if you get an indemnitor, that indemnitor, if they get support in paying the premium, they're more likely to. But that third of people that are still there often are there because they need to be. There is nobody who will stand up for them, right? Whereas if you are taking that step of signing for a substantial life-ruining penalty in order to help someone, those are the people I want to help because they've taken that side. So I'm not so looking at turning leaf as trying to help people get out for bail. Bail agents know how to do that. Do your job, get the thing. If you get more people out because they're supportive, that's good. But when they're out, let's help them. Let's help that
to argue with you.
dynamic.
What happens
Sure.
when somebody has, let's say, a moving violation, and it's a $30,000 bond, and they don't have anybody because they're from a different country, and they want to get out, and they're hardworking people, and I would say if that person had the option to be able to go with turning leaf, to be able to help them explore their options, to help educate them and work out some kind of payment arrangement with me, I'd be more likely to do the bond.
Well, that is true. I mean, certainly if you have any of the money that's there, and hopefully as we raise money, people have shown that they want to pay money for other people's premium to get them out of jail. They've made, there's charitable bail has been something that's gone on for a long time, but the difference of that has been that they have not really been looking at helping the defendants complete the criminal justice system. Most of the charitable bail that I've seen that's their goal is to get the person out of jail, but they don't do anything to try and keep them back in the system.
Do you have any information over the past COVID era of the inmates that were released without bail, and how many of them have gone back to court? I heard it was
Yeah.
some high amount.
Yeah. But so Los Angeles just did a report in March that covered the 3-year period that you can find online as well, and some of the numbers on it were confusing. In fact, if we want to have somebody in the potentially in the future, someone going over that particular report might be interesting. I have my phone ringing. I'm sorry about that. But it was like half of the citations had failed to appear. I mean, just numbers that would bankrupt a bail agent in a month.
So if the court cites people out and then they don't have that cost, but then they don't go to court, do we just leave defendants as fugitives and then work that through the next years or
Yeah,
decades? How does that help? And then
yeah,
the stress that goes on. I have a friend of mine, a very close friend, who had a warrant in Utah and a warrant in Arizona, and he didn't know what to do. And I think you
right.
spoke with him. He
Yeah,
came
yeah,
in
yeah.
and he's like, "Oh, well, I just called the court, and I didn't know I could do that. And they said I owed money, but I told them I didn't have as much, and they worked with me, and that weight's lifted. I've been carrying that weight for 10 years, Sean. And why didn't we
Exactly.
talk?" And I'm like, yeah, buddy. So,
There's so much of that that's going on. I'm not going to get the numbers right, but our friend Topo Padilla had done a report in Sacramento, and my best recollection of the numbers is there was 80,000 warrants that were active at the time, and there were maybe a dozen that involved bail. The thing is, when you get a bench warrant or an arrest warrant, that is telling the police to bring you back to court to
mhm.
arrest you, right? But there's nobody out there going to look for you like they do in the bail system. Yeah, they just stay out there, and there's tens of thousands of warrants, and a lot of them, the courts are just deleting at this point.
Yeah. This has been an interesting podcast where we've delved into some stuff. I think we're getting close to the end of this one. Is there
Thank you.
anything more that we want to note, or do we want to save it for our next podcast?
I think we went down a little bit of different paths than we had intended,
Yeah.
but I think we had a good conversation, and I look forward to the next one.
I'm pretty excited to think through some of the concepts where perhaps getting the state to help with citations and to help them with turning leaf and getting people back to court, not dealing with the stress of the warrant, not going and applying for a job and then the job saying, "Oh, you're a fugitive, you can't get that," because that
Right.
goes back to the poor judgment chain where people just through simple tweaks that turning leaf can help with prevents them from not being able to move up the ladder and be able to get higher paying jobs. I mean, it's
That's a very good point, and that illustrates what I'll sum up with is I've had a very unique experience in my life. I've gotten a very narrow band of that goes deep into certain subject matters, but just talking to you, I've come up with angles and thoughts that I hadn't thought about before, and that's really a big part of Turning Leaf is listening,
yeah.
is trying to find
You're a
the
great
other.
listener.
Oh, thank you. I
Yeah.
try, but it's trying to find those other perspectives to make things work. And for doing that, I think it's most important to find the people with the right incentives. And for me, that's the indemnitor. Supporting that indemnitor is the main purpose of Turning Leaf. And I think we can make the system much better by giving attention in that one area.
Well, I got to say, John, that getting to know you through the years, you look for noble goods. And I
Oh,
think
thank you.
Turning Leaf is a noble good. And so thank you. Subscribe, click, rate, review. Check us out. This has been the Bailed Out podcast, and we're happy to have you.